Some people have told you that you have to leave Louisiana
Yeah.
in order to either have success
Dude.
or to pursue your career. Why won't you leave Louisiana?
We joke you hang around a radio station, a TV station long enough, people will give you a job to do. So that quickly turned into a full-time gig. That turned into mornings, and I feel like I've been waking up at 4 a.m. ever since.
Is radio dying? Thanks for watching At Harry's. I am your host, Harrison Fredericks. Today I'm joined by Brandon Journée, also known as DJ Digital. Thank you for meeting with me.
Man, thank you for having me here. This is great. I've been a fan of what you've been doing, so it's exciting to actually kind of hang out.
I want to start this interview by telling you something, which is I have heard your voice for almost 10 years now,
Okay.
but I had no idea what you looked like.
That's magic of radio, man. Sometimes you get a face for radio. That's what people say. So, what's creepy as you say that is that more and more, and I think social media is kind of like one of the things to thank for this is people recognizing me from the radio. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they're like, hey, that's the guy from the radio. I'm like, how do they know? It's like people look things up, I guess, now. So Google is hard at work. But no, that's interesting. That 10 years and you
10
just figured
years.
it out?
I moved to Lafayette in 2015 and went straight to college at UL.
Okay.
And I've been listening to Hot 107.9 ever since. Just a quick little plug for them.
Yes.
But yeah, I've been hearing your voice, and you're in the right business because your voice is just incredibly smooth. It's very energetic, and I've been listening to you on the radio for 10 years, but never knew what you looked like.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because I feel like now, you look at what we do before, it was just, radio, introducing songs, giving out local information, talking about the latest trends. But now it feels like we're kind of having to transition over the last, maybe 5 to 10 years with social media. People do now know what like radio people look like, because it was always like a mystery. I kind of miss the mysterious part of it, because you can walk around in public and kind of be whoever. It's almost like hiding in plain sight, but no longer. So again, shout out to Google.
I want to learn a little bit about your backstory, your childhood growing up. What was your experience like growing up?
Oh man, it was, I'm fortunate that, I feel fortunate that I'm able to work, live, play in the place that I grew up. So I grew up here, people say Lafayette, but by way, my mom's from New Iberia, my dad's from Arnaville. We grew up, the bulk of my childhood was in, I always tell people I live in Youngsville, like pre-Sugar Mill Pond Youngsville, when it was rural, but born in New Iberia, actually. I don't know if many people know that, but at a very young age, we moved to Youngsville, late 80s into the 90s, and spent a lot of time there, moved to Lafayette. That's how far Youngsville used to feel away from everything. So, but yeah, moved, went to middle school and high school in the Youngsville Broussard area as that was developing, and have been in Lafayette my whole life. Almost moved a gazillion times, traveled, but something has always kind of brought me back. And once you reach a certain age and you're somewhere, like, you kind of don't want to move. Not to mention, we're in a pretty magical place, I feel sometimes. The more you travel, the more you tend to love Lafayette, if that makes any sense. So born and raised here. And it's incredible to kind of, it's incredible to feel like I'm traveling when I go to certain parts of town, because like, as much as we think we get around, most of us can't stay in our little areas of Lafayette or Acadiana. But when I go to my mom's, there's always like something new. Like, there's a new neighborhood, and it kind of feels like I'm a tourist in a place. Like, I don't recognize where I grew up anymore, if that makes any sense. But it's also exciting. So, it's crazy. I want to, like, when people ask me, where are you from? I tell them about a place that I almost feel like doesn't exist anymore, but in a good way.
I can definitely confirm that Acadiana is really special.
Yeah.
I'm from Slidell.
Okay.
Also known as the Dirty Dell.
Yeah.
And so I spent all my life growing up there, spent a lot of time in New Orleans, which
Yeah.
was just right across the lake.
Sure.
And so coming to Lafayette, Acadiana, a place that I didn't really go to much growing up, I really just fell in love with this place, the culture, the music, the food. I found community here when I was in college. What can you say about this community that is here?
You know, the community here, I always say Lafayette is when you look at the data, when you look at the size, when you look at the statistics, how many people, we're really like, I always say it's a mid-major, it's a pretty big city with small town values, if that makes any sense. Like, so many people like me have grown up here, have lived here. You live in a city where everyone kind of knows everyone still. So you have all those values of a small town in a place that's bursting at the seams, you know, where it feels like we can't, like, where will we put another car wash, you know? But you're seeing all these regional businesses and all these other, you know, national businesses now starting to kind of peek over, you know, and we're getting that attention, but it still feels like home. So you kind of still have that, you know, that, it's very easy for everyone to know your business, you know, if that makes any sense. So it's kind of magical, and that's in that way. So when I think about that I feel like that's how we keep the communities. People literally care. If something happens to someone, you can throw a rock and pretty much find someone who's very close to that person who you may have thought was a complete stranger. So that community feel, I think it's kind of a figurative and a literal feeling here because of just the makeup of Lafayette and how we've grown. And again, the people who, it's hard to leave, man, you know, and most people who leave come back, or we hope so.
I want to dive into your career as a DJ. When did that idea of being a DJ, when did that even come about for you?
I think it's one of those things like when we all want to be firemen, like that part of our life, or like we all wanted to be like a cop or a fireman or a doctor or whatever was like whatever seemed like the coolest thing in the world. And it's like, you know, I think it was always maybe not what I wanted to do per se. It was just something I really loved that I ended up having the opportunity, or should I say the privilege, to do, you know, for a living. What's the cliche? Find something you love to do, get someone to pay you for it. You never work a day in your life. I mean, I feel like I'm still kind of living that now, but you know, you and I were talking about broadcasting. I felt like when it was time to grow up, that the only way to kind of get into a real job or a career field where I could be creative or get into the things that I was into is if I took, you know, mass comm, because radio and TV broadcasting seemed like the thing closest to what I really enjoyed doing, you know? So, you know, I loved music. I loved creating. You know, actual disc jockeying was kind of a hobby, you know? I was really going in and learning Avid, and shout out to AOC, giving us the platform to just have a lot of kids. Ed Bowie, who recently retired, he really tolerated a lot of high school kids going in and learning on all this equipment. I mean, destructive editing, you know, like just kind of getting into linear editing and just all these. So I kind of like, I feel like I tell people all the time, I kind of feel like I learned about video and, you know, television and, you know, radio, and all at the same time, at a time where we were kind of between the analog and digital world. So like I learned the hard way, but also like as all the new technology was coming up. So I kind of I felt like I always had like one foot in each puddle, if you will. But it really became a thing where I kind of fell into my hobby by pursuing the technical side of it, if that makes any sense. So, you know, really, really, really enjoyed producing and taking two things from two different places and making a new thing, you know? So just that feeling, you know, and you know, to this day, like think about it, we're on this podcast, you know, and we're still doing the same thing, but just, I couldn't imagine this being the way that we create. I mean, you'd have to lug in, you know, all these tapes and all these different things. So I think just as I feel like I came up at the right time in terms of how the technology was evolving and becoming a lot more affordable, to be honest with you. So I don't want to say I stumbled into it, but I feel like it is something I've always wanted to do, even if I didn't know exactly what it would look like.
When it comes to live production, broadcasting, there's so many possibilities, so many possible career paths that you could go down.
Yeah.
Why did you land on radio specifically?
So man, you know, it's almost like it's like the most beautiful accident. I think, you know, I tell people all the time, like, luck, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. Everyone's got a different definition of it. You know, I feel like, you know, they say luck resides at the intersection of preparation and opportunity. So for me, I feel like I was always prepared, whether it was through researching or discovering or really just kind of diving into whatever I was into at the time. And anytime opportunity kind of presented itself, you know, I was always just around. So, you know, radio, to be specific, you know, I thought I was going to go and work at like a local TV station or something like that. So that's what I was going to school for. And while I was in college, I was DJing, and DJing led me to producing, and I was already producing video, but then the audio part was a lot easier to do and a lot more lucrative. So I really started leaning more toward that. And then came music production. And, you know, I ended up leaving school to actually pursue opportunities DJing. So this was right around the turn of the century, a few semesters into college, and I really like poured myself into that. And it wasn't until about 3 years later, there was a radio station in town. It was a rocker. It's called K-Rock. And 107.9 was the rock station. It was at the end of the dial, real edgy. And a couple guys I knew through DJing, they were like, hey, they're trying out this new format. It's like top 40, but it's also like hip hop. But they take the two and they kind of mix it together. And it was like this rhythmic top 40 format. And it was new. It was kind of a trendy thing that was happening around the country. I think a consultant at the time, Alan Sneed, great guy, and he's still around, and he was a great mentor of mine. He was a consultant in the area, and he was like, let's have some fun. Let's flip this signal and see if we can make something out of it. And there were a couple of guys there who tracked me down, and they were like, you'd be perfect for this, you know? And at the time, I will say, and this is, I mean no disrespect to my now colleagues and some of my best friends who were in radio, as a young DJ who was like doing the coolest clubs, or so I thought, you know, playing the best gigs out of town in places like, you know, Birmingham, right? You know, and really doing these remixes and edits and producing music. Like, I felt like I was almost too cool for it. You know, even as a club DJ, like we wouldn't let the radio DJs cut our commercials because it sounded like a radio guy cutting them instead of sounding cool, or what we thought was cool at the time. So I was hesitant. I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. You know, it takes up my time. I was waking up at 3 p.m. at the time. I mean, my schedule was completely flipped around. So, you know, they were like, just give it a shot. I'm like, all right, you know, almost as out of respect for the guys who approached me, who again, I knew through, they were also DJing in the community. I was like, all right, I'll, you know, submit an air check, which I didn't even know what that was at the time. And I wish I could find it, because God, I know it's terrible. It was probably just me doing 9,000 bar commercials in a row. But, you know, I didn't get the gig. They gave it to a guy who was out of Lake Charles. And I mean, he's still around. And I mean, when I tell you this guy was maybe, you know, yay high, but had the voice of Thor, you know. So to Sexy Lexi, a guy, that's who he was at the time. I think he turned Lexi into Lex. You know, he ended up getting the night position, but they were like, you know, but this other guy, you know, we really like him. See if he'd like to do Sundays. And so I kind of got the throwaway gig because, you know, some consultant, you know, thought I'd be a good fit. So I'm in my mind, I'm like, I kind of have the best of all worlds. I don't have to be here every day. I don't have to give up my nights. And I could show up on Sunday. I don't have to get here until noon. I was like, all right, you know, let's give it a go. So I was able, again, to kind of keep everything, and that pattern in my life, Harrison, it's like, I feel like I've really lucked out all throughout life where things just happen to fit, and I was able to have something without giving something up. And I did it. And immediately it was, you know, nerve-wracking, but it was cool because all of my friends from the clubs and the parties and just out and about, they were like, oh my God, we hear you on the radio. So it was awesome. It was like I kept doing whatever I was doing. I was doing that. And before you know it, I mean, we joke, you hang around a radio station, a TV station long enough, people will give you a job to do. So that quickly turned into a full-time gig. That turned into mornings. And I feel like I've been waking up at 4 a.m. ever since. So this was around 2004. And it feels like yesterday. I'm not kidding.
We were talking before we started recording about how sometimes people will just come up to you,
Yeah.
or they'll come up to me and they'll ask, like, why do you sound that way? Or do you have a background in broadcasting?
You know what's so funny, man, is I was last weekend, I believe. Yeah, last weekend. So 50 Cent does this like huge event, and I work for Double XL magazine. So like, again, a whole different story of how I didn't have to move away to do that, thanks to the pandemic. But they're coming down to cover that. I'm close. They're like, hey, you need to come up and do this. So we're in Louisiana, right? So we obviously had to take Ubers, and we're riding along, and someone in the vehicle says, hey, where is your Louisiana accent? Almost as if they've been dying to ask, almost as if like, they're a little suspicious. Like, is he really from Louisiana? Like, that's a question I've been asked my entire life. Where's your Southern accent?
Same.
Where's your Southern accent? And I feel like it comes out, like it depends on like the conversation, who you're around, but I don't know why I don't have one. My parents both kind of, you hear it, like you can hear the influence, but
I've been told I have a Hollywood accent.
what is that?
I've traveled out of the country a couple times, and
Yeah.
people say you have a Hollywood
A
accent.
Hollywood accent.
I think it's just this neutral.
Is it because
sound.
you articulate?
I guess.
Are we being penalized for
I
being right?
speak well? Is
Yeah,
that
is it like we
a
were told
crime?
to enunciate and now we're being penalized for it? But people will sniff you out. I'll tell you, that's another thing about Lafayette, going back to your community question, is we immediately know when someone's not, like, I mean, the tells are quick. Like, if you mess around and you put too much on that Lafayette, they'll, whether it's in the la or the fa, they'll get you immediately. So, it is funny. I get that is a question that comes up very often, is like, where's your accent? Almost as if like, are you really from here? Are you really who you say you are? But again, back to that, like even when I was asked to do radio, like I didn't sound like these other guys that were on the air, because I mean, they had the presentational, like really, in the industry they call it the puke. They really kind of put, we're on the radio, it's this deal, it's just very this way. Like if I'm in Target talking smack on someone, I sound the same way. Like I'm gonna get busted, because my wife often would say, "Shh, quiet down. Like you can't talk about people out and about. They're gonna hear who you are." And like I forget sometimes, but stumbled into that, man. And again, never had to change. Never had to be anyone really besides who I am, which is a huge plus. I'm fortunate for that. So I'm glad I wonder, like, if I did have a Cajun accent, or if I did have, what is that? There's like 7 of them to have, or even a Baton Rouge accent, or the 7 New Orleans accents to have. So that's a question I have for you. You're here now. Like, what is the Slidell, like what Slidell is to New Orleans? Like, what city would that be to Lafayette? Like,
Oh man,
because
that's
some
a
are
good
closer than others.
question.
That's a really good question, because when people say they're from Slidell, my best friend's from Slidell, and like he's from New Orleans. Like in my mind, he just lived in Slidell. just kind of a suburb of New Orleans. So
Slidell is really close to Mississippi.
Okay.
So sometimes you just get this sort of like country twang,
Okay.
Mississippi
Yeah.
kind of sound.
yeah, it's interesting. I feel like those only exist in Baton Rouge. Once you get to Alexandria, and then so it's weird, like this pocket of Lafayette that we have, Acadiana in New Orleans, it's almost like we didn't get the twang memo.
Yeah.
We got the flat, and then you kind of have that kind of yatty Italian nal, and depending on what part you're from, if you're a little more down the bayou than North Shore. So that's something that I'm going to have you dwell on, is like, what is the Slidell of Lafayette? You
That's
gotta figure
good.
that
I'm gonna
out.
be thinking
Is
about
it
that all
Jennings?
day.
Is
It could be, yeah.
It could be Jennings. You're a little close to Lake Charles. We'll still accept you though.
I want to circle back to your time in radio and just
Yeah.
get your thoughts on the industry overall.
Sure.
So here's my question to you. Is radio dying?
So I'm going to tell you, I think radio has been reinventing itself for the last 10 to 15 years. And I'm fortunate, the company I work for, I'll never forget, doing this for 20 years, I still feel young. So that tells you how long it's been around. Like, I look around at my peers who I'm in radio with, and you've got people in this market who have been in radio for 40 years. Like, as long as I've been alive, there are people that I compete with that I listen to going to school on the bus, So, as someone who's been in this industry for 20 years now, it's again, it feels like a blur. And I can't, like what I did on that first day that I was telling you, where I was like hesitant, I didn't know if I wanted to do it. It's completely different. So radio, I feel, has since that first day, just in the last 20 years, has reinvented itself out of necessity, because you kind of have to go where people are. You got to meet people at their doorstep. And there are companies, and you'll see it every day, and people who choose to do it the old way, and that radio still here, the old way of doing it has died. But I'll tell you this, the things about radio that are still here, that hasn't died, is really and truly kind of what got it to the, what got you to the, I always say that, like, don't lose what got you to the playoffs. If you're trying to win a championship, you can get rid of some things here and there, but storytelling, being authentic, being connected to your community, being a voice for your community, those things never die. All the other stuff kind of went away. The hokey, contests, the sound effects, and just the really, I feel like the way people get their information now, like no longer can you give people yesterday's news or a kicker story from last week in Minnesota where a woman found a snake in her toilet. Like those things don't play. I mean, there are people still doing it, don't get me wrong, but those things don't play nearly as well as they used to, because the listeners are so much more tapped in and educated on, think about how quickly like memes from just the Olympics went crazy. Could you imagine speaking about that a week late, where you almost have to, if it happened last night, within 12 hours, I may have had plans to talk about something else, and we have to pivot immediately because everyone's talking about one thing in pop culture, and let it be something local. And it's just the way news travels now. I feel like the old way of radio, the old way of what we thought translated into higher ratings, are out of the window. And not to mention just the digital aspect of everything. Everything's a reel. Everything is a moment, a meme. We're looking at an election right now where it feels like whoever's better at memes might have a shot at this thing. And what I mean by is like, what's the joke? What's the trending thing? What's the thing that people can kind of recreate or green screen? So long answer to your question is, I feel like the old way of doing it, it was kind of a, hey, if you want to stay on this train, the tracks aren't moving. But if you want to stay in radio, this is kind of where it's going. And a couple of colleagues for the company I work for, Town Square Media, we always talked about just kind of we're creating our future by innovating. So we were bought in 2010, I believe. We were Regent Broadcasting, and Town Square Media. It's almost been 15 years. And I remember the first day they came in, and it was like, we had a guy that basically said our website didn't look great. And that, for a lot of jocks in the room, they were like, what, who cares about a website? And in hindsight, from there, and then there was a guy saying, tablets are going to be on the rise in a few years, and video is going to be a big thing. This was 15 years ago. It was 10 years ago. So just kind of seeing where things were going in terms of how people consume media, and really kind of giving folks, not to get too technical or too industry speakish, just how people would be consuming us, even streaming. There were radio stations that weren't streaming, which is crazy to think. Like, you don't have an app, are you going through some other app? You don't have your own app where you can kind of get all the news and enter the contest. And so I think just recreating how we did radio is necessary. I think the old tried and true, this is how you have to do it, this is how many seconds you have to talk. I think that part, and not just radio, but I think traditional broadcast has changed. I mean, look at our market now, just with television, with everything. And again, there's some people who do it the old way. And for some folks it works, just kind of depends. But everybody's bills look different. That's the best way to describe it. So depending on what you want out of it, there are certain things that you almost have to do out of necessity to stay alive. So good question though.
Is there any part of the broadcasting industry or radio specifically that you think needs saving? I think, again, and I don't think, I think what we're getting back to is we're realizing that while we had to make adjustments to survive, and I say we as in just the broadcasting, and I'm talking about like terrestrial, over the air, traditional broadcast,
I think you've seen it, change in terms of how we get our information, or, I can't even get into things like AI. Like, I can't even get into things like how just remote access of, this is the best way to describe it. So back in the day when I started in radio, if we wanted to broadcast live from, I don't know, Jim's Boudin balls, paid us an amount of money to go out and talk about Boudin balls in New Iberia, we would have to get into, the station vehicle. We would drive out there, and then there was this like antenna. And I mean, it was this huge antenna. We had this manufactured metal thing. And again, I'm one of the youngest people in this industry, just even locally, in theory. So this was 20 years ago. This isn't even what they did before I showed up, as this kid who knew nothing. So I go and you back up the wheel of the vehicle. I can't believe they trusted me with this. This is crazy to even kind of talk about it in hindsight. And then, so it's almost like the things that people shoot those like huge fireworks out of, the ones that'll like really mess up your weekend if you get too close to them. And then you'd put this antenna in there, attached to this pole that would extend, and you connected this wire, and then you would literally crank it up, 20 feet in the sky. And then the other end of that cord connected to this, box. And from there you turn it on, and you had a cigarette lighter I mean, we were really like, you had to turn the vehicle on, make sure you had enough gas, and all right, so now we got power. And then, here come the dials, and you got to start dialing it in. And then there's someone back at the station who's on the phone with you, and you're doing a mic, because you plug the microphone into that box, and you're it's almost like you feel like you're like almost in the military, like tuning to try to find out what's the sweet spot. All right, so you gotta turn the antenna a little more, like where are we? And that was just so that we could get on the radio from like a live remote just to get our voice back to the station. And so thinking about that is like, my God, just to go and do it. And it still sounded terrible, by the way. It was like, share out your lives or whatever. But you knew it was live because it sounded like crap. But there was something magical about that. Almost the warmth of listening to the radio and hearing another person from the radio station, like you knew they were live on location somewhere. And like that was a moment where you can go and see them. Like, oh, they're somewhere live. We can actually go meet the person on the radio. So we would do that. So I think about, how now that same concept is literally like open up an app on your phone and you're connected directly to, and it's crystal clear, and people have to wonder, are they even on location? Because it sounds just as good as them being in the studio. So I think, like, again, another long answer to your question is those things have changed so much in terms of how we do radio. I think about what we do, how we do it, what's required of someone to, to work in radio or broadcast now. How do we hold on to those things that I was telling you earlier that got you to the dance, the storytelling, being genuine, being authentic, caring for your community, being in your community, not just being someone who's taking and not contributing. Those are like the things, getting out and actually meeting people. We stopped doing that somewhere along the way when things got a little too digital. And I think that's where we're at right now, is we got really, really digital. And then I feel like we were also like just insulated doing our thing. And we forgot that like, maybe I need to go crank that antenna up again. Let people see me. So I think now that's where we're at. We've got all these tools. We've got the AI. We've got the social media platforms. We've got the video. We've got all these things. And it's like, I feel like in order for us to really, really be successful, we kind of have to get back to the basics. Don't let go of where we're at and what works, but like maybe focus a little more. And I mean, think about you and I talking here. I'm watching podcasts really being a huge thing over the last, 5 years. It really exploded. People do want to lean in on conversations. Whereas in radio, I remember a time where it was, don't talk too long. Nobody wants to hear you talk. Nobody wants to hear you talk if you're not talking about anything. But if you're talking about something that matters, if you're talking about an issue, this week it was homework. Should homework go away? I didn't think that everybody felt the way that I felt when I was in middle school, but I'm like, I guess my friends grew up and now they're really, so it was like interesting that I was surprised that it was such a big issue. And then I started thinking about it, and it's like, we're so into so many different things. Like that time without something to do, or a screen is so important to families. Like homework was a huge issue. So it was like listening. And I say this, like, I think if you're going to be successful in this industry, listening more than you speak, ironically, as I ramble on this answer, is the most important tool in my toolbox, I think. Because my show every day is literally just, okay, like this is what people care. I'm watching what people care about. There's no guesswork anymore. Nobody cares about the zany story about the snake in the toilet in Minnesota. They care about, that one Facebook rant that mom in Jennings or Crowley or Brobridge or New Iberia went on, and like 8,000 other moms agreed with her. And I'm like, maybe this is something that people care about. Let's talk about it. Let's give people a platform. So again, the technology, the advancement, the change in broadcasting, downsizing, right? Because we have so many things that can do this job now. I think people want to see us out and about again, and just kind of getting back to those basics while holding on to the things that we have to do in terms of, social media, again, whatever it's going to be tomorrow, because it's going to change tomorrow again. But yeah, I think those are the things I think that we have to lean into to kind of keep it going.
As my guest, you are clear to ramble.
Yeah.
So,
well, I know you're going to do a great job in post. So,
I read your article recently that The Advocate did about you.
Okay.
And in that article, you said that some people have told you that you have to leave Louisiana.
Yeah.
In order to either have success
Dude.
or to pursue your career. So my question to you, why won't you leave Louisiana?
Yeah, I feel like I leave it enough. I feel like I travel. I'm fortunate enough to travel enough to get the best parts of not being here, I guess, if you will, which is not necessarily, it's not about subtracting anything about being in Lafayette. I think it's about like seeing enough of what the world has to offer elsewhere. Everywhere. You went to New York recently, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Dude, anytime I go anywhere, it's like my Louisiana radar, specifically my Lafayette radar, is like, man, this is so cool. Now, obviously, I pick something in New York. I don't know. What's the cool thing? I think a cool thing is when like buildings let people walk out onto like a walkway that's glass and you can see, but like, I don't think you give a bunch of Cajuns that opportunity, but I think about like something like that. That's an attraction. I'm always wondering, like, how do we tailor this to fit in Lafayette? So like, I feel like leaving, even if you leave and you go do something else and come back, and like, we need our best and our brightest in Lafayette. And if you got to go, but come back and bring the ideas that work. So yeah, that was the thing. Like if you want to do anything, if you want to make any money, you got to leave. And it's like, you know what, depending on what you want to do, maybe that's true. Depending on what you do, maybe that's true. But yeah, I think that, and again, I will say, I want to check, I don't know if it's as much privilege or, I know that it's not as easy. I know everyone is not in the same field. And I know I've been lucky many times over. But man, if you can figure out, like, if you can get out enough, I feel like you don't really have to move, especially if you love it here. Because all my friends that moved away, they miss it. They miss it all the time. They miss seasoning. They miss how nice people are. They miss how genuine people are. Just all of these little things that you really don't miss until you're gone. So, but yeah, I remember that article actually, and it was at a time I think where I had a couple friends that were going. And it's like, again, of course you can leave, and I encourage anyone to do the best that they have to do for their families or for themselves. But I don't know if it's a necessity. I don't know if that's one of those hard, fast, like, oh, if you want to, like, I can't say that and absolutely mean it, that if you want to make anything of yourself, you have to leave Lafayette, Louisiana, or Louisiana in general.
I want to talk to you about vinyl because you're a vinyl collector, right?
This is your timing, man, is your timing is really, really good because you're bringing up a lot of things that I've been procrastinating on for quite some time. Yes, I have a very big vinyl collection.
So I want to ask you, it seems like vinyl is back again. Like it kind of goes down a little bit,
and then it's always,
but it peeks its head up more often than we realize it.
Sure.
So is vinyl forever?
I think tangible is forever. I think anything that makes you think about a time where you were at a point maybe in your life, or with a person in your life, or a feeling in your life, and like vinyl is just, for the most part, unless you've got one of those like educational albums or a jazzercise, kind of thing. I think it's just like it's a feeling, and it takes you back to whether it was remembering waking up every morning. I had a girl recently who her song at a wedding with her dad was what is it? It's such a good song, dude. It's something In the Mood. It's the whatever. I hope we don't get flagged by that. But it was like she picked that song, and normally you do the slow song, depending. But it was because every Saturday morning, that's how her dad got the house up and going to get cleaning for the weekend. And it was like, so again, it's that feeling. It's like a song will take you back to a place or a tradition, or every Saturday before cleaning up. So I think vinyl is that tangible, put it in your hand, not to mention like the digging and the finding and the whole, I found this thing. And for me, it's like I've always said, like my vinyl collection is really just if there was ever a tangible, physical, like timeline of my life, or maybe where I've been or what I've done, it's probably in there, because it takes me back to, that was a time that I was, here. And I feel like you take a piece of a city with you every time you kind of dig and you find, someone's vinyl. Like if you and I went up the street to, I don't know, there's like a flea market, someone from an estate sale at one point, and I love when there are names, Cheryl Thibodeau. That album, she went out, Cheryl bought it, and she probably laid on her bedroom floor, put her headphones on, and she'd listen to that one song on that album over and over again. And now like her records are in my collection, just on a shelf in a room, So it's, I think that for vinyl, it's that thing that like you went out and you got it and you liked it, and whether it's, again, a song that you remember with your parents, or a song that you remember. And I think now for me, I'm old, and as I get older, more and more of the records from my childhood are showing up in these record shops, which is definitely a tale of the time that I've been here doing it. So it's actually a little more fun now, because I get excited to see Ace of Base and cassette tapes and all these other, things I grew up with as far as digging for the vinyl. But you reminded me that I'm actually needing to move it, and moving vinyl is so tough because you can only carry so much at a time. It falls all over the place. It's also kind of delicate, and it's a lot. So again, Harry, you're reminding me that I have to move, but I'm going to move it for the last time. So, but yes, it's a big vinyl collection, and I think more people should go out and dig for records.
I love hearing your passion and just your excitement about vinyl.
I'm holding back, actually, so we could talk for a long time about it.
I grew up in the 2000s, so I was part of like the CD era, MP3 player era as well. And those are tangible, but they're just not as cool. Vinyl just has this...
It's warmth.
Yeah.
Literally, it's warmer. The spectrum, again, not to get technical, is wider. There's more sounds. So I don't know, and there's just something about, just the pop whenever you first drop the needle on, just a little bit of that crackle. I think it's the imperfections, also, when it comes to vinyl. And to be clear, I grew up more in the CD era. I didn't grow up with vinyl. It's something I had to go back and get. So I don't know where that came. I mean, my aunts and my parents had it, but I didn't grow up with it. So it's something that was just so cool for me, just to kind of, and I DJ'd with vinyl too. I think that's really probably where the love, when I started DJing, vinyl was kind of still around for DJs, just because of how acapellas and instrumentals, and you can kind of manipulate the music a little. So using it for that is what really, it was my love for vinyl, and it kind of went back and learning and sampling and figuring out that favorite song of yours actually came from this song. And it's a lot to get into, but man, it's so rewarding. It's definitely my favorite collection of anything that I have. So.
And speaking of DJing, I have one final question, and it's a fun one.
Okay.
Who is the greatest DJ?
Oh man, I have some favorites. A quick answer would be, I think about Jazzy Jeff, because you've got DJs that started at like the dawn of time, right? Then you got DJs that got a little more technical, and it was really all about the scratching and the tricks and all those things. But man, those early on DJs, they were just good selectors, right? So you've got like the DJ that can do all the tricks and the technical DJing. And I've kind of always been the type of DJ where, how do we marry, going back to a point I made earlier, is like, I find if I have any success or any time I've had success in radio, it's less about what I think needs to be said more than me listening to what people are, talking about, and me just really kind of providing a platform for that discussion to keep going. I think the same goes for, I don't walk into any type of space, whether it's a corporate event or just, a house party, which those are amazing if you go to the right ones. And you really just like look around and I'm almost like a Spotify algorithm where I start to look at all these people. And I guess it's a little judgy now that I think of it, but I've got like a few minutes to kind of figure out who these people are, what moves them individually, and then figure out what that Venn diagram looks like between all those people, and like playing the right songs at the right time. So like being a good selector is really what makes a good DJ. And then you add in the technical skills, the timing, the drops, the actual, melodies and mixing in key and all those things that I think about a Jazzy Jeff who, he's been doing it since the 80s. He's a great DJ that marries those two things, and also just the like he's not afraid to teach, other DJs, and still to this day, man, he's still doing it. Questlove's he's an amazing drummer, but Questlove is an amazing DJ. But again, it comes down to selecting. I think those are the two that definitely come to mind. I mean, I can go down the rabbit hole of Z-Trip and all these other guys that are just amazing DJs. So it's hard to pick one favorite. Yeah.
My favorite is Swedish House Mafia.
Oh gosh, okay.
So I am a huge fan of electronic music.
Sure.
Dance music.
Yeah.
So Swedish House Mafia, they have been they're just my favorite artists.
Yeah.
Ever.
I mean,
Don't You Worry Child is my favorite
song
ever made.
Yeah.
It's just got all the feels. It's got an incredible rhythm and tempo to it.
It's a good song.
Yeah.
It's one of those songs that actually make you feel. It's such a good song, man.
I get goosebumps almost every time.
Yeah, it's a good. And then you got the guy. Yeah, the guy comes in. Shout out to male vocals on EDM. We don't have enough guys just belting out tunes over.
That's true. A lot of DJs don't really sing or talk,
man.
or they just kind of stay behind the decks.
That's a good one. I'll definitely have to share. Now that I know that's what you like, I'll definitely share some music with you now.
A close second is Daft Punk.
The
Godfathers.
For me, that's when I think of electronic music, as crazy as it's gotten with like kind of festivals really exploding over the last decade into the mainstream, you go back to these guys, these French house guys who literally were so about the music that they put masks on so people wouldn't know who they were. And yeah, Daft Punk, I mean, just goodness. And just even the spin-offs of like Daft Punk, Justice, and all these other acts. So yeah, Daft Punk definitely, that's a top 10 artist in my, it's hard for me to pick favorites, but they're up there, man. Good stuff.
Well, that's going to be it for this interview. I appreciate your time. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, man.
And for just bringing your perspective, your expertise. I really appreciate it.
Keep going.
I want to make a deal with you. If you hit the subscribe button, I promise that I will continue to improve this channel. The production will get better. The conversations will get better. That is my guarantee. If you enjoy what I do here on this channel, then I hope you join me on this journey. Do we have a deal?